So look, what have you been up to this week?
All over the place this week. Actually, doing a bit of stuff in sports, um, dotting around the various publishers, trying to work out whether there should be trying to work out whether we should create a giant technology prize to whip up the AI community into building the opt-in mechanic of the future. That's what I've been up to.
For copyright, for
Yeah,
publishers to opt in.
kind of on the basis that I feel like there's a big debate in the UK about it, but it's all very abstract. And I think the publishing industry could do well, the creative industry could do well to move it to the here's an actual system, here's a thing.
Yeah.
How would that work? And
Yeah.
just move the conversation on a bit.
I worked on one of those about a year ago with a couple of well, it was about 15,000 publishers from a load of industry groups called ERGAT. We should compare notes and see where we're at on that.
Yeah, it's funny.
So
I wrote the article about it and then spent the next day with people going, I built that, right? Yeah,
there you go.
yeah. Of course. Very sorry.
Yeah, there you go. So I've had an interesting week. I decided on Monday to write an article summarizing the end of the Google search antitrust trial. So, for those of you that aren't across it, we're 640 days since the trial opened. The closing arguments were on Friday last week. And this was kind of like, this is the final demands from the DOJ and the final riposte from Google. We know that Google's been found guilty of being an illegal monopolist, so that's all done. This is really about what are we going to do about it. And so I thought, well, this is no problem. I've done this 100 times. I'll go and read the documentation and, I'll see it. And then it was over 250,000 words all up. The feedback from the DOJ and from Google. And so I've actually spent the whole week working on it. I literally finished about half an hour ago. So I'll be posting in the morning. But oh my goodness, I mean, those breakup demands are really, really robust. And, we still need to wait and see if a judge picks up on them, but we'll find out by mid-August. But to be honest, I've never really seen anything quite so aggressive and detailed, to be honest. I don't know. Have you had a chance to read over them yet?
I haven't got to it quite yet. The 250,000 words. No, I was relying on you to summarize.
Well, I can do that. So basically, that what we've seen in the papers is kind of a really a gentle précis of exactly what's happening. So the first thing is that Google Chrome, they want Google to let go of Google Chrome. And so I've said on here before, Google's the kind of keystone to the arch, or Chrome is the keystone to the Google arch. 66% of all it's actually 58%. 68% of all the web traffic takes place on Google Chrome. The platform that built Google Chrome is called Chromium. Chromium is also the platform of Microsoft Edge and pretty much all the other major browsers, except for Apple's Safari browser. But then Google has a $20 billion secret deal with Safari to use Google Search as its search tool. So really, Google has 95% control through Chrome and that Google deal with all web traffic. But then it goes to mobile. So then Google buys Android. And then 76% of all the world's smartphones are built on Android. And all the smartphones that aren't on Android are on iOS. And the $20 billion secret deal with Apple covers that as well. So it's got all of the web traffic and it's got all of the mobile traffic through Android and through Chrome. And then, of course, all that data flows through and through and through and down the pipes and everywhere from 4.1 billion people's behavior on the web into Google's massive third leg on its stool, which is its monetization. And so, when you're arguing about, is it a monopoly? Well, that's kind of a difficult argument in that scenario. The question is what do you do about it? And so the DOJ, I think, has done an absolutely rocking job of showing very clearly that Chrome, the thing that no one really pays any attention to, is actually the centerpiece of this entire thing. And there was a really interesting leaked document, which if you read all that bloody paperwork, then you'll eventually find, there are gems all the way through it, numbers that I've never seen before, but also gems like leaked emails or internal documents. And there's an internal document from Google's execs talking to each other about Chrome, where they describe it as the operating system of the open web.
Mm.
And so if you want to think about, what that means, if Android is the operating system of mobile and Chrome, they view it as the operating system of the open web, there is no other data, which means they
Mm.
completely control all of the open web. So I thought that was really interesting. And, you know, what the DOJ is saying is that Chrome has to be divested.
Mm.
And if it is divested, then it will impact all parts of Google. So 60% of Google searches start in Chrome. So if you take away Chrome and you give it somebody else, about $160 billion worth of ad revenue doesn't go to Google, it goes somewhere else. Well,
Mm.
that's a lot. Okay. And then if you decide, that's US, by the way. And if you decide to take away the Chrome piece, and you start to socialize some of its search data, it wants to take some of its search data and make it publicly available to everybody else and its competitors.
Mm.
That takes another 20% off of Google, which is another 50 billion US dollars of opportunity. So what you're effectively doing is ripping $200 billion out of Google's $350 billion and socializing it to the open web. Which I find absolutely fascinating. But one of the other things I absolutely loved, and I didn't really quite cotton on to this until I read all this document, is that to prove that Google was an illegal monopolist, you had to prove that there was some kind of public harm. That's typically the way of thinking about it. They don't really care
Mhm.
about other companies. They want to make sure that the public, the customers, aren't being harmed.
Mm.
And where Google went wrong here was that once Google got all that data, I mean, I can't even imagine how much data that is. Once they got all that data in, then what they did was they hid it in a box. And so they used to reveal to publishers, you'll remember when you were there, and I've
Yes.
certainly remember
Yeah.
too, that you'd get data that was saying, this is how many ads you've served, this is what the CPM was, this is which advertisers they were, this was the
Mm.
yield, this was what worked, this is what didn't work, this was the click-through rate. All of that data just got sutured and sutured and sutured by Google because it kept it to itself and it reduced and reduced and reduced and reduced the amount of information it shared. The problem with doing that is it absolutely protects Google's position as the preeminent advertising business on the web. But what it means is you're paying customers who are publishers and
Mm.
advertisers got a worse service for paying more money. And so when Google started to put the price up to 36 cents on the dollar, it
Mm.
pushed the price up and reduced the quality of the service, ergo, illegal monopoly. And
Harm. Yeah.
so it's been a fascinating journey into the deep legalities of how all this works, which is, to be honest with you, left me with square eyes because I've been staring at this computer for 4 solid days. But that's what was able to be eked out. So I'll be writing about that tomorrow.
And I would say that they've been pretty. I think that so you've said this before. I think the DOJ have done an incredible job, but they've been really focused on this is about restoring competition. So this is not about. I think sometimes you see these cases, and it looks like this is about punishment for the monopolist, or it's about fines, or it's about the EU loves a fine. You'll get a 200 billion or whatever, and 200 whatever the cost is, and quite often the companies are just able to pay the fine, move on. I think they've been really, really clear in a lot of the sort of case sort of studies that every time there's been a behavioral remedy, Google have effectively just moved over it. And every time there's been a kind of governance remedy, Google have just moved over it and carried on. As in, the machine almost is so powerful, the momentum of all of that kind of architecture is so powerful that the only way to restore competition to the open web and to restore, stop the harms, it is to basically fracture it. And I think they've really, really kept that in mind. So there's a couple of times, I can't remember the exact quotes, but they've been pretty clear, haven't they, that this isn't about kind of a rap on the knuckles or a fine.
No, it's about creating new opportunity, new innovation. It's
Mm.
effectively to redraw the web. So I've
Mm.
heard, I keep seeing people talking about Web 2.1 or
Mm.
3.7 or whatever it is, 16.2.
Mm.
Right, there's only really been one web, which has been Google's web, and that's ending. And so I think
Mm.
Web 1.0 is ending.
Mm.
And the DOJ wants to create a Web 2.0. And so, on the very last day of the summing up, and I thought this was absolutely priceless because as if I didn't have enough work to do, that just to drop this in on the last day, thanks so much, DOJ. They
Mm.
literally just said on the last day, oh, by the way, Judge, could you also please fix this AI thing? Because that's going to be
Yeah.
the future. It wasn't quite like that, but it was very similar.
Mm.
So now the judge has to think about, okay, well, what am I going to do with the future of generative AI? What am I going to do with the future of Google Gemini? And so what's also become clear, and it's been very worthwhile reading all these documents, to be honest. When you read all the documents, lots of testimony that never got presented in court is in those documents. So Nick Turley, who's the head of product of OpenAI, said that if the data from Google search was socialized with OpenAI, it would advance OpenAI 5 years overnight.
Why?
Right. So they're spending $40 billion a year at the moment, all right, on trying to build the future of AI. He's just basically said, here, we can save $200 billion and get to 2028 in AI tomorrow if you socialize this data. And given that the DOJ and the judge are of the view that all the data Google has was obtained through foul means, then that suddenly becomes a real possibility. So it's obviously about money. But the way I'm kind of organizing all this in my head is there's three things that really the DOJ is seeking to fix here. There's discovery, which is basically search. Yeah. Then there's distribution, which is basically Chrome. And then there's monetization, which is Google's ad infrastructure that's built on top of those other two things. And the reason the publishing industry is in a hole is because it doesn't control discovery, distribution, or monetization. And so if those three crack, then you do have an opportunity suddenly, $200 billion. I mean, I think the total earnings of all the publishers in the world is about $10 billion for advertising. So, yeah. I mean, $200 billion, even if the publishing industry still did a terrible job and only managed to get a tiny share of it, that's still going to be enough money for them to reestablish themselves and go back to innovating again. And so I'm not sure that message is really getting out to the publishers. I'm not sure the publishers as a whole have figured that out yet.
I think as we said before, it's actually so long since there are people who've had whole careers since there was a genuinely competitive, innovative open web. And so it's sometimes I think it's hard to sort of see how it will break out. But to go back to your numbers, if it's 200 billion of sort of impact, YouTube is 50 billion, and the total Google is 350 billion. It's effectively 2/3 of everything. That's kind of back on the table. Now, there is. How do you see then from what you've read the relationship between this case then and the kind of AdX exchange case that's coming later on?
Yeah, the ad tech trial. So the ad tech trial's remedies documents have also been presented, and I've read those. I haven't read the closing arguments because they haven't had them yet, but I have read all the documents.
Can be excused for that.
Yeah, no, I know. To be honest with you, I've read so much now, I've forgotten what's in the public arena and what's not. But if I have a look at with the ad tech trial, what the remedies they're seeking to do there are basically to limit Google's ability to hide data, to make sure that they socialize stuff, to make sure that the targeting tools are shared, that the AdX, effectively the ad exchange that Google trades ads with. I've got an ad, I want to put it on a publisher. The publisher says yes, and it all opens up. Everything that happens in that box is hidden. Can't see it. So they want to make that transparent. But more than that, they want to make it transparent in real time via APIs. And so that's very interesting because if you're looking to optimize your advertising, or if you're looking to build a competitive service that might, for example, just for the sake of argument, you said, all right, I'm OpenAI, all right, I'm going to provide you with excellent new search for your site based on OpenAI, but we'll also sell the ads on that. Okay, but because you're licensing our technology to do our AI, we'll pay you $55 CPM on normal page view ads. Yeah. But we don't have a problem with that anymore because we have this unlimited supply coming over here from Google. So now that feels like an investment worth making. Yeah. So I think there's lots and lots of different ways that this is going to get carved up. And there's something in the DOJ paperwork on the search trial that's really fascinating because it starts to break down where it thinks the new owners of Chrome can benefit. And it says there are three things. So the first thing is, it's literally written like this. Our advice to you as the new owner would be to monetize it the same way Google monetizes it, because we're going to make all of their data on their audience public, and we're going to make all of their data on their advertising public. And so therefore, just do what Google does and That would be good for you, number one. Number two, the Gen AI companies are going to want to be part of Chrome because it's two-thirds of the web. So they're going to argue over what they can do and maybe compete to pay you a lot of money for access to
Yeah.
it. Okay. And
Yes.
so OpenAI and Perplexity both said in the trial, oh, we definitely pay for that. Oh, no
Yeah.
question. Oh, like we're 100% in on that. Yeah. And somebody from Google in an internal document said, we don't quite know how AI is going to work, but mass adoption is probably going to happen in Chrome. That's what they said in
Mm.
court. And so, like, that wasn't lost on the DOJ. You instantly said,
Yeah.
well, there you go, right? So the new owner has the opportunity to do that. But the third one was really interesting. They then said, well, hang on a minute. Google will have to license referral traffic back from Chrome, or otherwise YouTube and search will diminish so much that they won't be anything like as valuable. So they're going to have to pay you too.
Mm.
So, I mean, that's insult to injury if you're on Google's
Yeah.
side of the fence. But if you're on the other side of the fence, that feels just peachy, doesn't it?
Yeah. 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 So you're they seem to be drawing out this kind of interoperable version, don't they, of where you can, and this seems to be also coinciding with the way that the AI companies kind of want it to land too, which is you should be able to swap in and out of all of the browsers your choice of your AI assistant.
Yeah.
You should be able to have competition on the kind of ad inventory. You should be able to have competition on discovery. Um, I mean, all of those, to be honest, seem like opening up competition, innovation, which always will raise prices.
But why do we find that such a radical idea? We should have,
Yeah.
right?
Sorry,
You
just
know,
to be clear, raise prices for creators
yeah.
and publishers rather than to consumers. It's a good thing.
Yeah, no, it is a good thing, and we've forgotten what choice looks like because we've been so used to being under the Google's boot, you know.
Mm. Mm.
But when I look at it all and I break it all down, the big questions for the Web 2.0 that I think is about to emerge is going to be who is going to get Chrome. So that's a massive question. So we talked about it on our
Yeah.
last Scotch and Watch. I know, but look. I can only make the case that I've made several times now, and no one really, not at the DOJ or anywhere, actually disagrees with this. So the first thing is every single tech company in the world's put their hand up. Okay, so Microsoft's in there, OpenAI's
Mm.
in there, Perplexity's in there, Yahoo's in there. Everybody's saying we'll take it on. If you give it to another tech company, okay, it's just going to create another monopoly and you're just going to be back in court again in 5 years. And so I don't really think that's likely to happen. Then people say, oh, well, the private equity guys will come in, they'll buy it because they've got tons of money and they really care about profit. But you see, this is where people go wrong because the DOJ's effort has nothing to do with profit. Zero to do with profit. It's actually about competition. So it's not interested in making more money for shareholders or making more money for Google's shareholders. Certainly not. So it's not about profit. Okay. So this isn't a business decision. It's a competitive decision. And then the third one is that, oh, well, it'll go to a government then. Well, I know lots of governments around the world want it. Okay. But no one's going to hand it over because then that's going to destroy the web's it's not going to be a World Wide Web. It's going to be a splinter net. It's going to be worse than that.
Yeah.
So that causes chaos. So if it's not 1, 2, or 3, who's number 4? Number 4 is the publishing industry. And in the ad tech antitrust trial, it is clearly stated verbatim that the
Mm.
entire reason the DOJ is doing this explicitly is to rescue the publishing industry. And although it doesn't explicitly say it in the search antitrust file, it's very clear that the main beneficiary is content creators for the web, which a large
Mm.
part is the publishing industry. So you could probably view through a historical lens in 4 or 5 years. I think everybody will say that this was about rescuing the
Yeah.
publishing industry. So therefore, if that's the reason, then it would follow that a sensible organization to step up to take control of Chrome would be the publishing industry and the people that create the premium content of the open web.
Yeah. Yeah. And you would think a kind of a consortium is is preferable because it has different competing interests in it. I agree with you. The government one is a non-starter. I don't think any. I think it's just too much part of the commercial internet. The government has no business there. Also, would do a terrible job.
Yeah.
That's just an absolute non-starter. I agree with you also on you can't see anybody from the tech space, anyone who's big enough to do it automatically adds too much power to their own existing market share, so
Yeah.
it kind of gets ruled out. Um, yeah, and I think again, go back to the point. If the DOJ has been all the way through, this is about competition. This is about preserving. They don't. What they really don't want to do is having how long you say they've been in court? 2 years.
640 days.
Yeah, yeah. So
Not that I'm
roughly.
counting, but it's
No, no,
exactly
no.
640 days
Yeah,
today. Yeah.
more than 2 years. What they don't want to do, as you say, is just put in something which just creates the same problem over again with a different name and a different set of people in court.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly
So
right. And there's one other thing I'd point out now, having read all that documentation, it's still sinking in, is that, one of the things that the DOJ says very clearly it wants in the remedies is that it wants to make all of the information that Google has on consumer data, like targeting data, it wants that made available in real time via an API. And all of
mm,
the data that comes out of search, it wants made available in real time via an API. Now, if they do those two things, okay, and the Chrome data is then revealed
mm,
via a real time API, the tech companies don't need to own it because what they want is
yeah,
the data, not to
yeah,
manage it. So if all they want is the data and the data is available via a public API, they get everything they need to advance AI
mm,
5 years
yeah. But also,
automatically without
but
owning it.
and also, so does every small startup, mid-sized scale up. Anybody who has an idea about how they could build kind of interesting technology that worked on the web,
Yeah.
which to me is the big opportunity. How does so the Chrome sale goes through. The In terms of the Apple deal, there hasn't been. I haven't seen as much kind of directional. There's been a very clear you can't do that deal,
Yeah.
but I haven't seen much that says what you can do.
Mm. So the deal is about exclusivity. So the $20 billion was to buy all of Apple's traffic on desktop and mobile to fill
Yeah,
in the gap of the monopoly it didn't have, right? To fill
mm,
in the last little bit.
yeah,
Um, Now those deals were exclusive. They were also out of sight. Okay. And the main outcome of doing that was to kill any ambitions Apple had in creating its own search engine. Yeah.
yeah,
And so Apple had already built a browser, Safari, all right, and it had ambitions to build a search engine. And it had hired a guy called John, I can't pronounce his surname, but it's Gianandrea,
mm,
his name is, from Google, who was their head of search. They
mm,
poached him, and it was a really big deal at the time that he was poached. And they brought over a couple of other guys, and they brought over the brains that were required to run a search engine for Apple. And there was an awful lot of talk at the time that Apple was going to come after Google on search. But it never happened. And it
mm,
never happened because $20 billion was paid in the back door, kept nice and quiet. Apple
yeah,
sits down and goes, runs some maths that you and I would have probably run, which goes a little bit like this. I can spend 20, $10 billion trying to build a search engine that might fail. Or I could take a check for $20 billion with zero cost or risk attached to it, which is 17.61% of my total net profit of my company. And I think that I can put that in the bank and not worry too much about it. That feels like
mm,
a good idea. And so it definitely did do that. One of the things that the DOJ explicitly calls out, though, in the paperwork is that it now expects Apple to enter into the search space.
mm,
And so it's deliberately trying to drag Apple out. And so that basically means that, look, do we want innovation in search? Yes, we do. We're seeing some of it come already in AI.
mm,
We're not really seeing it come from Google, although we should talk about AI overviews because there's some interesting stuff
mm,
in there about AI overviews. But what it's basically saying is that how about we just make all of the search data available to everybody that gives everybody a head start just to build the consumer front end? They don't need to build the back end.
yeah,
And so Apple's ability to build a really compelling new version of Siri a really compelling new way to have an assistant on your phone or on your other Apple device, some kind of persistent conversation or audio or visual
Yeah.
version, depiction of the web, all of that becomes available because the data, the raw materials that are the hardest to get, all become available. And I'm really excited about what the next generation of innovation looks like with AI sitting on top of Google's data.
Yeah. How do you think Apple handled that from? Because I always thought one of the other things with that Google deal was it allowed Apple to kind of hold a privacy position while, at the front door, while at the back door, anything that looked like it was kind of, data driven monetization was kind of passed off to Google. And so Apple could always hold this position that it wasn't something that they did because they'd
Yeah.
done that deal. So if they have to enter into that world, sure. I mean, they can't. There are some of the positions that they kind of publicly hold that they can't really stand up as well if they're going straight into that game, right?
Well, look, without being controversial, that position that Apple's held forever has been a lie since the beginning. So, to be clear, they've got an antitrust trial coming up before the end of the year, which literally accuses them of using privacy as an elastic shield to protect their business model. And so, as soon as they did that deal with Google to put Google search into Safari, every single time you type anything into the Safari URL
Mm.
browser, okay, or the URL spot,
Yeah.
automatically goes to Google and Google tracks you anyway. So I think that the argument that Apple's, I suppose, right to say, well, we don't do it, but they absolutely give you the window to go and type into your own machine, which automatically passes it to Google. So I think Apple's on a very, very sticky wicket on that, to be honest with you. I think they're going to struggle, and that court case is going to embarrass them quite a lot, given the ads we've seen on TV and your iPhone is safe and all this kind of stuff. None of that's really true. They've been passing the data through to Google in return for this $20 billion. And, they were particularly happy about it when it all got dragged out in court. On the second day of the court case, they insisted that everything was done behind closed doors. And the judge nearly said yes until at the last minute, a reporter from Bloomberg called Leah Nyland stepped into court with about five lawyers and just went, how about we do it in public? And the judge was like, yeah, okay, we'll do it. Otherwise, a lot of this would never have been known and we'd be none the wiser. So I
Mm.
think one of the other amazing things about justice in court cases like this is that it just drags the truth into the light. And I think we've kind of forgotten what that looks like
Mm.
because some of these companies are so big and so clever that they've done an excellent job of hiding, or they're really good about talking about the good stuff and really bad about talking about the bad stuff. And,
Yeah.
it's why I keep saying again and again that, I don't really listen to anything they say. I look at what they do. And that's why I spend all my time in the numbers and the evidence.
Well, it'll be an interesting. I guess an interesting month for Tim Cook because he's trying to work out how he replaces the 20 billion, but also how he gets away with charging $5,000 for a US made iPhone.
He retired, is what I think he does. Yeah. So I think we're about to see a huge change in the leadership. So I think Tim Cook probably. I know he just extended the other day
Mm.
for another 5 years because he loved the job so much. The job he loved is not the job he's got. Okay. So here's my belief. I believe that what's happening is that the leaders, and I put Sundar Pichai, Google CEO, in this list, is that they've all taken jobs that they know they're going to get fired from when they lose the antitrust cases.
Mm.
And so they're a gatekeeper and then they're the fall guy. And then they go and buy an island in the Maldives, right? And so I think from their perspective, that's their job. And, they've done their job and they probably knew they were going to be a fall guy eventually. And I think Tim Cook knows he'll lose the privacy case. I think Sundar has already lost all his cases and he's going to lose the appeals. I think they're just seat warmers.
Yeah. So did I see that Google has set up? I read somewhere Google has set up a kind of governance committee for all of this thing, taken $500 million. Is that right? Put it
Oh,
aside.
oh,
Yeah.
hang on a minute. Down the back of the sofa. Oh, yeah, there you go.
And kind of carved it out of the everyday running of Google and said we're going to have a committee, to kind of work this through. I guess for them, it's becoming now it's an operational, job that has to be done. But you're right, it's
No, but there's another massive risk hanging over them, Chris. And I urge you to put your CEO hat back on, right?
mm,
So, and I'll put mine on because this is what's happening there. Is that you've got a company that has a market capitalization of more than $2 trillion. It's got $350 billion worth of revenue, growing 14% year on year. Okay.
Mm.
As a complete market monopoly, can't be competed with, and is still growing faster than the market.
Yeah.
And so if you're a shareholder in that company and you've been attending every single one of its quarterly updates, as I have, and you've been hearing everything's just rosy, thanks very much. And then you suddenly get to three monopoly antitrust losses in a row, and you're a
Mm.
shareholder, you can only take the view your board of directors and your CEO has either not been telling you the whole truth or they just don't understand the business they're in. And so I think you're right on the cusp of a multi-billion-dollar shareholder revolt where they say you have just destroyed $1 trillion worth of our value. It's our value, not yours,
Mm.
our
Mm.
value. Okay. And you've been doing this all in the background. I've seen all these leaked emails. None of this was mentioned in any of our board meetings. None of this is in any of the paperwork. Where's the full disclosure? Where's your fiduciary responsibility? I think that is a giant asteroid headed their way.
Yeah.
And I think we're trying to get ahead of that by putting this committee in place to at least diminish the size of the shareholder attack that they get. But I
Mm.
mean, in my experience, and I've had shareholders, you have too, right? Shareholders love the money more than they love you or me. Is that fair?
Yeah. Oh God, yeah.
Oh God, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I suspect that Google's about to have a rude awakening on that. By the way, Meta's got the same thing. Meta's got a shareholder court case pending as well after it. And, the shareholders took the view that $140 billion was wiped off Meta's valuation after
Mm.
Cambridge Analytica. And they
Yep.
feel that when they asked Meta for just how serious this situation was, they got a kind of very soft soap answer to that. And as a result, when $140 billion was wiped off and the full damage of Cambridge Analytica became publicly known, those shareholders all took a bath on that. And they want their money back because they
Mm.
feel that they were lied to, is actually the word they use. But I think, Meta would argue that they just didn't really quite understand the extent of the problem. I think the shareholders would say, well, it's kind of your job to know that.
Yeah. So it's so interesting thinking if you think back to the Trump inauguration, that sort of row of
Yeah.
tech titans, and at the
Mm.
time, I think it was generally perceived that they, because of that picture, that they had somehow taken over the White House.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, what we've seen pretty consistently since then is a very, we talked about this before. This isn't happening without the White House absolutely kind of being behind it. Because
100%.
nothing is at the moment happening without them being behind it. So, if you think of the position that go down that row of people, the position that now each of them is in with the court cases, possibly only Jeff Bezos that's sort of not. I can't think of the moment of that's not right in the public domain at the moment. But everybody else is being kind of gradually defenestrated.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so, I'm kind of looking forward to the day, not too far away, year or two, where I'm going to run a post with that picture, and I'm just going to put red crosses over all the faces. Look, somebody in America. I was in America 2 weeks ago trying to get a publisher consortium together for Chrome, and I'm back again in 2 weeks.
Mm.
But one of the interesting things that happened there was somebody very, very, very powerful said to me something kind of like at dinner, really quietly in my kind of ear,
Mm.
something you and I had been talking about on the podcast. He basically said, when Google turned off all those publishers in Europe, yeah, and showed that they could turn off 1% of all publishers in America at the flick of a switch, that really, really scared the White House. And the White House suddenly realized that they could be silenced by a company that was motivated by profit and not motivated by politics. And you and I talked about this
Yeah.
on here about 6 weeks ago, right? And so that level of power, when the platforms are more powerful than the politicians,
Yeah.
automatically leads, I believe, to this kind of leveling, this kind of brutal takedown. Okay.
Mm.
The big question for me, actually, if you follow that through, is, about 30% of the US stock market is reliant on these tech stocks. About
Yeah.
$13 trillion And for GDP and for US exceptionalism, these companies are the badge of honor for the nation as it's
Yeah.
fighting a bit of a battle with China. If you're Judge Amit Mehta, and his name is Mehta, believe it or not, but yeah,
With an H. Yeah.
yeah, Amit Mehta. Not only have you got the job of breaking up Google and resolving the future of AI, and don't let me forget to tell you about AI overview.
Yeah.
If you've got all of that on your plate, okay, and then you have to take the company down in a way that doesn't destroy its entire value so that it doesn't destroy the US stock market. I mean, if they blow up Google and it's $2 trillion of market cap, okay, and it literally blows up, everyone's house price and everyone's car insurance is going to go up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so you're a judge, you're thinking, well, my job's to stop competition, right? It's not really to prop up the nation in a geopolitical battle for the ages with China. It's
No.
not to think about how do I not destroy, 30% of the stock market. And so he's got a massive, massive job on his back and a huge responsibility to create the future of the web, right?
Yeah. 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 But I mean, I do think so. And we both know that there's huge amounts of the Google world where they can monetize things better than anybody else, and that will last for a period of time. There's a huge reliance, I think, on probably on some of the infrastructure. So you can see a world in which Google is much less dominant, structurally kind of much less dominant, but still is a hugely profitable,
Yeah.
probably 150 billion, dollar company, which would still make it, you still make it, a big part of the US economy.
Yeah.
It does feel like the this sort of administration bet is that the kind of we're almost moving to the AI company, AI world that will replace this.
Yeah.
And that's where that's where Stargate sits. That's where the kind of the UAE investment goes. That's where, the kind of the legislative part around no state can regulate AI. That's only really the administration brackets
Mm.
Donald.
Yeah.
That all of that feels like that's where we see the value coming. So, yes, we're prepared to diminish some of these companies. It's the same with Meta. I suppose is a bit different because it depends what remedy there is and whether that is actually an individual governance. And we talked about this before, whether that's a kind of taking out individuals for malpractice rather than actually breaking the companies up.
Yeah.
But I still
Yeah.
think that they'll retain, 50 to 70% their value for 3 to 5 years, by which point you would hope that, the kind of world had healed itself in ways that were equally profitable
Yeah.
from a GDP perspective.
Something else that came up in the paperwork that I thought was fascinating was the debate about, okay, well, let's say you want to take Chrome out of Google, right?
Yeah.
That feels like an enormously difficult job. I mean, how are you going to do that? It's not like going and digging a tree out of the garden.
Yeah.
It's like, this
Yeah.
feels like it's going to be fairly difficult. But
Mm.
there's amazing evidence in detail, like incredible detail. Now I used to run an AI company, as you know, and
Mm.
so I know a little bit about how this stuff works. So the first thing that they say is, well, look, the way that Google Chrome has been built is that it's a standalone business and it's run off of a code base that all of these other people make called Chromium. And
Mm.
so this Chromium code base is created, and then APIs like if you like pipes go
Yeah.
from Chrome into Chromium and suck the goodness up, and we create Chromium. And so in the breakup document, Google went to a huge length saying, you have literally no idea how much work it's going to take to do this. It's embedded
Yeah.
into everything. It's like brain surgery. You'll never know what to do. And this bloke's just like, isn't it just a load of APIs? And then they're like, well, yes. And he goes, right. So if all the APIs stayed exactly the same,
Mm.
then Chrome wouldn't change at all, right? And they're like, well, no. And he goes, well, we're not proposing to move it down the street to a warehouse. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're just proposing it's put under new management. And therefore,
Exactly.
new management can manage all these people and the experience for the user won't change at all. And when you see it actually really written out like that, you go,
But
like,
also when you're
let's,
coming from a perspective that we've gone through all of this in order to rule that the current setup is illegal. So actually normally, if this were a normal kind of M&A transaction, somebody selling it, would have a lot of control over how that kind of took place. It's not going to be like that because
No, it's
the whole
not.
point is if they have to have quite a long transition arrangement, so change of control with a long transition agreement in terms of infrastructure, engineering, kind of provision of services, all of that kind of thing. As soon as you change the control and you have somebody thinking about just about distribution that isn't linked to Google's monetization, the world changes.
Yeah.
Even if all of the operations and all the pipes and all the infrastructure are running the same, we know that from every company that's ever moved ownership. The day after, people think differently, talk differently, walk differently. And so
It's going to
that
be,
I think is the way.
and it's going to be a court order.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not like, oh, I don't really feel like doing that and I've got to take my dog for a walk on Thursday. It's going to be like, you absolutely have to do it exactly like this or else.
Mm. So actually to that question, so the remedies kind of the decision mid-August is like we've proposed, we've heard you, this is therefore what we want, but that's still that is a kind of a directional set of remedies. It's not a plan. It's not a kind of scheduled and phased and all that. So how
No,
does it give any indication how that happens?
it does in tiny detail. So it says that there'll be a technical committee established
Mm,
by the
yeah,
court. But it's not the same. There's a lot of detail about the technical committee in the ad tech breakup. There's less detail in this one. It basically says there'll be a technical committee established with the intention of completing a transfer of the ownership and the management and the whole thing. That
yeah,
will be completed within 3 years. Actually, I think it might be 2 years.
mm,
And it basically says this is exactly how it'll happen. So there'll be court appointed trustees that will have the responsibility to work directly up to Google. And there will be a technical committee to work with the new owners to make sure that it comes under new management and that meets the competition regulation. It doesn't stipulate a price. There's a lot of talk in the market. And there was certainly a lot of talk in the evidence about how much money it's going to cost to buy Chrome. So a number kept bouncing around, $20 billion.
mm,
That number has never been validated by anyone. And to be honest with you, the only people that were talking about paying a price were the big tech companies. And I think what they were trying to do was to scare off potential buyers. Okay. And so, again, to your point earlier, there's no reason for the court to require any payment at all for Chrome because it's not about paying Google's shareholders for their illegal monopoly. It's
yeah.
about making sure the competition tomorrow is different to what it was yesterday.
I'd be even stronger on that. They can't profit.
No.
The whole point is that the case has shown that over the last 10 to 15 years, what the economists have called sort of supernormal profits
Yes.
have been taken out of the economy and out, the harm from harms. They
Yes.
can't then at the end of that be rewarded for it.
No.
So you're right. I think
That,
there's a downward pressure on the price rather than the other way around.
no one's picking up on that. And so, when I go and talk to publishers about, let's jump into this game, let's get into it, they're like, well, Ricky, I don't have $20 billion. I was going, nor do I, but we don't need it. Okay. So,
Yeah,
look,
yeah,
I think that, probably the most important job you and I can do in all the stuff that we do is just to keep talking to the market to explain the real world, not the one that they're
mm,
assuming. Because
mm,
I think there's some Stockholm syndrome in here. We talk about it a lot, that they just believe that there's some hidden monster in here or some terrifying cost or something that they can't, there's some real reason why they can't do it. There's nothing that stops them actually at this point. It's about energy, gumption, vision. The one thing the DOJ does say, though, that's interesting in the remedies document on page 240 or something, is it says that it wants whoever takes Chrome to make a commitment to growing Chrome. So there's some interesting, yeah, so there's some interesting stuff in there. They're talking about, you have to invest in making it better. Otherwise, we haven't achieved innovation. You can't take it as a cash cow. And I think that's why, the money markets won't end up getting it. I don't think private equity will get it for that reason. But
yeah.
there's some interesting,
That does feel like you
it
can't
does.
just come in and harvest this.
Yeah, it feels like a fuck off banker, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's what I read it as. But the interesting thing is that this then followed in the very next line, which I don't think is an accident, where it says that the revenue from Google Chrome is growing at 16% year on year, and the cost of operations raising at 4%. And it's literally in the next line. So it's clearly saying, hey, look, I know you don't have a ton of cash, all right, but this
Yeah.
thing throws off cash like
Yeah. Yeah.
like a Greek wedding. And
Yeah.
what's going to happen here is that it's also growing faster than the costs are growing. So what we'd like to see is maybe a leveling up of the cost of the revenue against the cost. I think that kind of level of investment would be great. But I mean, Google Chrome, if you look at Google Chrome's operating costs and Google Chrome's contribution to Google's earnings, it's a 99.1% net profitable business unit. There's enough cash flying off to be able to fund, everything and a football table. You'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
My only caveat with that, as always, is internal accounting. Internal accounting shines light wherever it wants.
Yeah.
So quite often, I mean, and it's perfectly legal, is you structure bits of the business to say, well, you can carry overheads, you can carry this cost, you can carry that cost.
Yeah.
So things that are 99% profitable and we own them in our structure, suddenly when you start transferring out all the overheads that we never put against it because we quite liked it being profitable, in that way, there's all kinds of tax structures and things that can make things look very glitzy
Yeah. No,
until
that's
you
fair.
take them out of that structure. But
But
we'll
with 208, I'm pretty sure with $288 billion, I can run all of Western Europe.
yeah, I don't think it's going to turn out to be a dog. Put it that way.
It's a pretty fit greyhound if it's a dog, I'll tell you that. So, look, reading through all the documentation, as painful as it's been, has given me a much, much, much clearer insight, of how Google works, in terms of its technology and how all its little bits fit together. It's not as complicated as you think. It's just incredibly smart. If you were to, play a game of pachinko, I don't know if you ever played, you drop a ball in the top and it bounces off the nails and you've got to try and
Yeah.
guess where it's going to land at the bottom. If you do that once, you've got a very, very low probability of figuring out where the ball's going to land. But if you do it 6.3 trillion times a month, and you have a machine measuring it, then your likelihood of getting it right gets much, much better all the time. And that's basically what Google's done. So Google's taken something that sounds like it's completely impossible to predict what someone means when they type in a huge spelling mistake and they're actually asking about who that actor is in Game of Thrones. And it's really confusing. But because they've seen every spelling mistake 1,000 times, and because they've seen everything that person's searched for in the past, and because they know that that person watches Game of Thrones, okay,
Yeah.
because they know all of this, they're able to analyze and put together a likelihood that the answer is going to be this. And if you think about it from that perspective, that's what AI is. It's a prediction engine. And so the fact that Google's duffed up AI or done such a bad job of AI is another reason to dump the CEO, frankly. But by the way, I think the reason they didn't do a very good job was because they were trying to protect that cash cow again, which is another reason to end a monopoly because it's not allowing it to go into the future. But if you've got all of that data and all of that volume, then we can build a much better web. And if you had, Chris, when you were CEO or managing director at the Times, or when I was news editor in London, and I had that level of insight into my readers and the information, I can't even begin to imagine the flourishing of innovation that emerges when the entire world's zeitgeist and DNA is released to the world's most innovative people. That has to be a great outcome. And I don't really give a shit if Google goes down in the middle of all that. I just think that it's probably a sacrificial lamb for the betterment of humanity.
So go back to because we said we cover it, in terms of the protections around AI. So it came quite late in the case.
Very last day.
And this was, we talked before about, we see in the same way that we talked to a lot of publishers who are on the kind of, we're moving from print to digital. Google is moving and Meta is moving from kind of search or social to AI, and they're trying to make this kind of internal transition work. And they're doing it as they have done previously by just self-preferencing their own services within their own services, like the kind of Russian doll of platforms. So what was the pronouncement around AI was what exactly?
That all the data that Google has that can train the AIs is made publicly available to everybody. Okay, there's no fee attached to it, by the way. It's made available to everybody as a public service via live APIs. Now, I should be clear, it's not everybody. It's what they call a qualified competitor. Okay, that's the phrase they use, qualified competitor. So they're not going to throw it out to some Belarusian bot farm. Okay, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
It has to go to a qualified competitor, and you can imagine who those qualified competitors are going to be. It's going to be your open AIs and your perplexities and your publishers and others that have some kind of rules attached to them. The other thing that came up was privacy. So Google made it really clear that as soon as this stuff all gets out there, all the privacy of everybody in the world is going to disappear. If you read the documentation, and I shouldn't presume as to what the DOJ was thinking when it wrote this, but I'm pretty sure they were laughing their socks off as they wrote it, because they're thinking like, so hang on a minute. So Google is now a protector of privacy. Is that what's happening? So,
Yeah.
the surveillance leader in chief has now decided to say, "Oh my goodness, people's privacy is going to be impinged." So basically, they've said that look, if Google has all the information and it's private, then it will be given to everybody else in the same format that Google's got it. And if it's not private enough, the way Google stored it, which means that Google's not told the truth about how they were storing the information. If it's not private enough, then Google can't use it either, and we'll get rid of it from them as well. So again, it's almost as if they've thought of everything, right?
Yeah.
And
But
it isn't.
but on that AI point, I suppose, I mean, the logic of that legally is you can't be taking advantage of something that was created in the way that it was and giving yourself an advantage in moving to the next market. Right?
Yes,
That's sort of so from a judge's perspective, it's like whether that is, you've got a monopoly in cows and now you're kind of, you're going to move into the dairy market. It's a terrible example, but you know what I mean? It's just a logical, you can't take this and then advantage yourself for the future and be seen to gain from what you've held.
it's exactly
So
what the last day was about. And so,
yeah.
look, I can't imagine that this was an afterthought from the DOJ. It has to have been strategic that it chose to do it that way. I don't know whether it was because they didn't want to get into an argument with Google about it in the court and they just wanted to drop it in at 5 to midnight on the last day. I don't really know. But all I can tell you is that it's very clear why they did it, because they explain it. They basically say that Google has enough power and enough reputation and enough money and enough heft and enough
Yeah.
gravitas to bully anyone into anything. And so if it went to Apple again, and it went to Samsung, and it went to Motorola, and it went to AT&T, these are all the companies that moaned in the case that they were bullied, and it went
Yeah.
back to them all, and it just said, hey, guess what? Like, we're going to pull all our Android phones from your shops, AT&T, unless you bundle Gemini on here. They're explicitly trying to disable Google from being able to do that. And so it very clearly says you cannot do default deals in the future, not for any amount of money or for any other term or any other reason. You just can't do it. We're just not going to allow it to happen. And so from that perspective, you're absolutely right. The intention from the DOJ is to stop them using the same playbook to build the next generation. And that's what it's about.
So big winners, I guess, from that are probably the pure play AI companies who don't have kind of data assets. So it's an open AI, it's a Perplexity. Perplexity just did a deal with Samsung, I think.
Well, what about
Um,
every other browser, every other search engine? Bing
yeah.
is going to explode. So if you've got any money to invest, if I was you, I'd be putting it in the smaller AI companies and in the smaller browser companies and in the smaller
Mm,
search engine companies, because their valuation is going to explode. Can you
mm,
imagine how the value of OpenAI is going to go if it's able to advance 5 years in a day?
yeah. Yeah.
That's probably why it hasn't IPO'd yet. Let's wait another 3 weeks and it'll IPO for $4 trillion or something.
It's a not for profit, Ricky. It's a not for profit.
Oh,
It's just a,
sorry, of course.
just a chat.
Well, it is this week. Yeah. Yeah. So,
Amazing.
look,
Before
yes.
we run out of time, just on we'll do some very quick, like 1 minute on each. The Meta case. Where do you think that ended? My bet is kind of a bit meh.
Yeah, 50-50, I'd say. So, look, I've made this case before, and my position hasn't changed. The Google case was really easy to prove it was a monopoly. It's harder to break up. With Meta, it's really hard to prove it's a monopoly, but it's the other way around. It's really hard to prove it's a monopoly. It's really easy to break up. So I think that the FTC hasn't done anything like as good a job as the DOJ did on Google. The FTC's looked really quite inept and not very exciting, and it hasn't landed any massive blow. I think that Meta's day of reckoning comes in November when it faces the state's case over its abuse of children. I think that's going to be where it really hurts.
So in terms of the current case, more likely wrist slap, possible fine, but nothing structural would be my gut feel at the moment.
I think it's 50-50. It's literally on a knife edge. I can't call it, and that's not like me. Normally I do, but I can't call this one. It's so close.
So I'd agree with 50-50. The only reason I tend to go towards not structural is the precedent that it sets, which because it's a kind of retrospective unpicking. I would think the case had to be much better than 50-50 to go back.
You might be right,
but we'll see.
The one thing I'd add to that is that like Google's genuinely liked by the public, and Facebook and Zuck is genuinely disliked by the public. I know that shouldn't be part of a judge's decision, but they kind of started 3 points behind, so maybe it goes that way. I'm just not sure.
And TikTok, my favorite. So TikTok looks like it's going to get another 90-day extension. I heard yesterday that so this is we haven't talked about this for a while, but this is basically the Congress and Senate said this is an illegal tool of Chinese state influence, and we can't have foreign actors influencing the American public. We need to close the US TikTok or sell it so that it's US controlled. And there was general view that maybe that deal would happen, and I think the president was very clear he would make the deal happen. But then we seem to be in a kind of US-China trade war, and the deal hasn't happened. And it's had a 90-day extension from Biden, then it's had a 90-day extension from Trump, and we're about to get another one. And the question, I suppose, with that one is, will the Senate and the Supreme Court and Congress all lie down and let that happen?
I reckon that a decent strategy if your objective here is to hamper your rival, then giving it constant 90-day extensions is a good policing tactic. Yeah, it might just be we'll just keep kicking the can down the road for as long as we can until it loses patience. I'm not sure it actually does America any harm to keep doing that.
Yeah, the counter argument though is the whole point of that case was that China was able to influence US opinion. Okay. And TikTok is carrying at the moment, most of the kind of the videos of Americans working in sweatshops, and it's gonna basically cover the tariffs and the impact of the tariffs in a way that the American press is not going to. So it just on the bones of the case, which was is this platform able to basically influence in a way that we don't want? It's much stronger. At the point of the third 90-day extension, the case is much stronger than it was at the original point.
Well, all right. Let's put our names on the line. What do you think is going to happen?
I actually think we might be on the brink of there being pushback from the Senate and the Supreme Court. I think a third extension is difficult, just to the point also where the tariffs are becoming, there's a little bit more sort of sensitivity around that too. I just think to roll over a third time is just basically saying, well, actually, the Supreme Court doesn't really hold the whip hand here.
All right, my prediction is nothing happens. My prediction is the opposite. So I reckon they sit still. So we'll see who's right.
We'll roll that bet on. My third thing very quickly was UK copyright. So we saw there's this bouncing back and forth between Parliament and the Lords, which is kind of like Congress and the Senate, but it's more like the government and a technical lawmaking committee. And there's a question about transparency for AI companies, which has now gone back a fifth time. Now, that hardly ever happens. You might see a couple of twos and fro's, but to go back a fifth time, this is essentially the UK lawmaking Lords saying, we really do want this to be included in the bill, and the government still saying, we really don't want to include this in the bill.
So can I do an idiot, really fast idiot roundup for people that are on not because they're idiots, but because most of them won't have been following the UK government quite as closely as perhaps we have. But please correct me if I've got any of this wrong. But basically, what happened was that the UK views itself as the third global superpower on AI, which may or may
Hmm.
not be true, after the US and China.
Yep.
And therefore, it wants to do everything it can. The government wants to do everything it can to enable AI to choose the UK as its location and to drive the UK economy. The UK government, Labour government, right?
Yep.
Basically has a head of technology or a head of whatever his role is, and
Yep.
so he basically says, you know what, we're going to ignore copyright, and it's kind of open slather really for everybody in AI to come and use anything they want. That led to a massive amount of complaints, and all the British newspapers and all the British media companies got together and did some enormous campaign to argue that this was unfair. There
Yep.
was then a period of discussion or debate where people were allowed to send in their messages. It was one of the largest ever responses, I think 11,000
Yep.
responses. Government. The government was taken aback and said, okay, we're going to have three options. You have to help me with these, mate. Option number one was we'll do absolutely nothing. We leave it as it is. Option number two is thermonuclear. You can use anything you want. You don't have any rules. And the third one is that you can opt out if you don't want your content to be used.
Yeah,
Is that
there's
right?
four. So there are four because they said that there's an option which is basically total exception. Do what you like.
Yep.
There was one which was narrow exception. You do what you like unless people opt out. And
Yep.
there was an option which was opt in, which is, you have to have permission to do it. The
Yep.
government's favoured option was the narrow
That's right.
exception. And that was what the consultation was all about.
And then at the end of that, there was then a massive pushback in the House of Lords, which is the higher.
Let me stop you there. There's two separate things. So there was a big AI kind of report which government rubber stamped without putting it through Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's the start point because it kind of gets the lawmakers' backs up a bit.
Yep.
Out of that came this consultation about, well, how would copyright work?
Yep.
And that was basically badly handled by the department who were responsible for it. So that's got the creative industries back up. There's a separate bill that's going through Parliament, which is the roughly called the Data Bill, which is a bill that has all kinds of things in there about kind of modernising the way that the UK treats data. And some of that is just because we've come out of the EU, and so we're allowed to kind of do things slightly differently. So that's kind of merrily going through Parliament on its own. And what's happened is some of the lawmakers and the Lords have gone, well, hang on a minute, we've kind of been ignored over here. But what we can do is make sure there's no way we're going to pass a data bill that doesn't acknowledge the presence of AI.
Yeah.
And so we want these amendments put into that bill,
right.
which say there has to be some transparency about the sources used in AI. There has to be a mechanism by which, people can kind of with it. So there's a basic series of amendments tabled by Baroness Kidron, and therefore kind of known as the Kidron Amendments, which is a pretty cool thing to get your name on. And that's the thing that's bouncing back and forth. And the government has sort of at points said, like, don't do this here. We don't want to do this here. We'll get back to AI copyright. Stop trying to do this too early. Then it's kind of said, we haven't got the money to fund it, and therefore you can't put it. The Lords isn't allowed to put things in the bill that it hasn't got budget for. So they tried that, and then they bounced it back again. So it basically just keeps coming back to this kind of implacable force in the Lords. And so to me, it's a really interesting one to watch because there is a view in the UK that maybe the government has slightly been captured by the developer side and the potential of inward investment into AI and the desire to be an AI superpower, and is prepared to kind of throw the creative baby out with the bathwater and do it. And the lawmakers at the moment are saying there is if you look at all the things that are in this data bill, to not have anything in there that talks about transparency or the use of data in AI is almost negligence on our part. So this will bounce back again, and we'll just see what this will keep going.
Amazing stuff. Could go on forever, right?
Could go on forever.
The last thing I wanted to talk about, just really quick, because I've got to jump, is the AI overviews. So I always pay very close attention to AI overviews because I have a very personal relationship with AI overviews. For those of you who don't know, I broke the story of AI overviews existing when it was only a patent 3 years ago at Google. So I've watched this thing go from Google saying it was just a patent, that it was just an experiment, that it would never roll out, that they were just playing with it, it was never intended for prime time. All of this, I knew it was lies because my sources that gave me it in the first place were telling me what was really happening. Then every publisher was ringing me and telling me not to be alarmist. And then Google got up on stage and announced it was launching it in 100 countries. And then all the SEO people stopped calling me. And then it goes round and round and round and round and round. And here we are now, where I think something like 1.5 billion people get AI overviews in their search results routinely. So, don't listen to what they say, look at what they do. Please just stick to that rule of thumb. It's sort of done me very well. So anyway, in this document, it says, guess what, Google? This AI overview thing probably looks a little bit like what the future of search should probably be, which is absolutely great. So as a result of thanks for all your excellent work, what we now require you to do is to reveal exactly how they work and release them all to the public. And so now every publisher is going to know where their content is, and every publisher is going to be able to charge for it. And every publisher is going to be able to negotiate or either own the platform or own the way it works or license it via an API. So you're certainly going to see a new opportunity there for licensing fees, which is another way that the DOJ is seeking to support the publishing industry. So Google can no longer use its search data to make this work without knowing the provenance and the original source of the content in the first place, which is beautiful.
That's an all-round good thing. What a lovely way to finish.
Absolutely. Well, look, amazing, mate. I enjoyed that. Look, for everybody that doesn't know, Scott Watch is going on a world tour, isn't it, mate?
Yeah,
we're off to. I got the emails and the details this week. Where are we off to? Where are we off to?
Madrid.
Yeah, we're off to sunny Madrid for Sangria and Watch. It might not be Sangria and Watch. That's a terrible name, but we'll go with that for now. And so when is that again?
October.
Fantastic. So if anybody else wants to get Scotch and Watch on their gig, all they need to do is drop us a line. But for now, awesome. Thanks for everybody. Thanks for joining. I'll post this as normal in the next couple of days. Chris, awesome to see you, buddy.
Great to see you. Thank you. Thank you on behalf of all of the listeners for reading all of the documentation that you do.
My goodness me, I've drunk a lot of coffee in the last week.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thanks so much. And I will catch you next time. Cheers, buddy.
See ya. Bye-bye.